All right, History 30 students, I want to go over the War of 1812 and how that ended up shaping British North America, and what happened in the event or the events leading up to the War of 1812 and so on. So remember where we left off last day. We looked at Canada and the American Revolution and how the 13 colonies were the major British colonies in North America, and they got to a point over issues with taxation, and over issues with being able to settle in the Ohio Valley, where they came to a point of revolution. They revolted and were successful, and on July 4th, 1776, they became the United States of America. And there were still British colonies left over in North America, namely Quebec and some colonies in the Maritimes, and those leftovers now became known as British North America and would end up becoming Canada later on. So also remember that Great Britain was somewhat self-reflective in the years following the American Revolution and wanted to find a way or settle on a way so that their existing or remaining British colonies in North America would not revolt. And they decided that it was too much freedom and democracy that led to that. And so in 1791, they passed the Constitution Act. Another one of those documents, if you look in Canadian history, we now have the Royal Proclamation 1763, the Quebec Act 1774, and now the Constitution Act of 1791, sort of a landmark historical document in Canadian history that limited democracy. It created Upper and Lower Canada out of the colony of Quebec, and basically it created a form of government where there was a governor who was appointed. There was a council that was appointed that had all of the power and decision-making in the British North American colonies, and there was an assembly that was elected but didn't really have any power. And that lack of representation, again, that's what the 13 colonies were upset about. That lack of representation in government, again, would come back later on and become one of the primary reasons that would push towards Canadian Confederation in 1867. So today I just want to take a look at the War of 1812. You might have heard of it before. In the United States, if you look into their history, some people will refer to it as the Second War of Independence, or an extension of the First War of Independence. We know of it as the War of 1812. So there's some, you have this Google Slides uploaded to Google Classroom, and there's some stuff and information and videos that I've embedded and linked in here so you can follow that along, but I'll just go over the notes that I have as well. So I want to take a look at the War of 1812 and events leading up to it, because as is always the case, the end result is a product of the events that lead up to it, and you don't know that it's happening at the time, but it does. So there were events that were taking place in the world that would obviously contribute to how the War of 1812 unfolded. And one of the events after the American War of Independence, the world actually kind of saw this domino effect where you started to see the replacement of old non-representative monarchy forms of government with republics in France. That happened in 1789, the French Revolution, so not that long after the American War of Independence. So the fallout of the French Revolution, and we're not studying the French Revolution here, but the French monarchy was abolished and a republic was initiated. Early on, that republic was not successful, but the monarch, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, they were executed, so they did away with their monarchy. Now, as I said, that representative or that republic that they established really didn't or wasn't effective, and it created this vacuum for power. And a guy by the name of Napoleon actually took control of France and ended up plunging France and all of Europe, in fact, into war. And France expanded greatly under Napoleon. But the fallout of that was that most of Europe was engaged in a massive war up until 1815. Okay, in North America, there was this push for for continental expansion. So you had, because the Ohio Valley was basically off limits now, there was no fur trading going on in that area anymore because it was being opened up to settlement. So there was this push north and west in the continent. And if you remember from way back when, the Hudson Bay Company had the original charter and monopoly, so there would be no other British fur trading companies that would compete with the Hudson Bay Company. But there was this upstart Northwest Company that basically had banded together and was the result of, reestablishing the old fur trade routes that had been established by the voyageurs way back when Montreal was kind of the head of the center of the fur trading in New France. So a number of explorers, and they were competing explorers. Some worked for the Hudson Bay Company, some for the Northwest Company, and they just basically kept on exploring and pushing westward in search of new fur trading routes, in search of new fur trading territory, and that basically stopped until they ended up reaching the Pacific Ocean. So Alexander Mackenzie, he was one of these early explorers. He reached the Arctic Ocean via the Mackenzie River, and he called it the River of Disappointment because he wasn't looking for the Arctic Ocean. Basically, he got to that point, found this great river, thought, hey, this is going to take me to the Pacific Ocean, and then realized pretty quickly, and it only took him a couple of weeks to reach the Arctic Ocean, that it wasn't what he was looking for. Now, the Mackenzie River, unfortunately, wasn't what he was looking for, but it actually is a fairly wide navigable river to some degree. The reason that it didn't reach the Pacific Ocean, of course, is it turns north along the Continental Divide and ends up draining into the Arctic Ocean because it doesn't cross over the mountain ranges in the northwest of British Columbia. So in 1793, Mackenzie does reach the Pacific Ocean, but he has to cross overland to do it, so it takes a lot longer for him to get there. And he becomes the first European not to see the Pacific Ocean from that side, but the first one to actually go overland to see the Pacific Ocean. So Mackenzie worked for the Northwest Company, but later started a bitter rivalry with the Northwest Company by starting the XY Company. So not really significant in terms of what we're trying to do here, but he was a Northwest Company explorer. So this is Mackenzie Rock, and I've been here actually. It's just, I used to teach in an area, or a place called Bella Bella, and this is just in the channel, I don't know, probably about an hour from Bella Bella by boat towards the mainland. And if you were to see the rock, you wouldn't necessarily know you were at the Pacific Ocean because you're just in a channel. But obviously you know by the salt water that you've reached the Pacific Ocean. Now the story goes, and that's fairly accurate, I would think, but the story goes is that Alex Mackenzie had a Bella Coola guide, and this was as far as that guide would take him because they had entered into Heiltsuk territory, and the Bella Coola guide knew that if they stayed too long in Heiltsuk territory that there would be trouble. And the Heiltsuk Nation is actually, that's where I had my first teaching job, and the people there have corroborated this story as well. Their ancestors were known for taking care of business, and they would not let a Bella Coola guide come too far into their territory. So I think Alex Mackenzie was quite wise. They spent the night here at Mackenzie Rock. He painted or carved in his famous words here, Alex Mackenzie from Canada by land, 22nd July, 1793. And that's as far as he got. It is somewhat significant, however, because they did reach the Pacific Ocean. And if you remember way back when, we talked about the economic and geographic advantage that the Hudson Bay Company had because of using the Hudson Bay route. And this, even though Alex Mackenzie was a Northwest Company explorer, this would kind of signify the end of the Northwest Company because they were able to exist as long as they were able to find new fur trading routes. But this obviously meant that they had reached the Pacific Ocean and there were no more new and fresh fur trading territories to find. Okay, there were other guys. Simon Fraser, that name is pretty big in British Columbia. There's Simon Fraser University, there's the Fraser River and so on, the Fraser Institute. he worked for the Northwest Company. He was actually looking for the Columbia watershed. The Columbia River is a much more navigable, smooth flowing river compared to the Fraser River. But Simon Fraser ended up finding a different river, the Fraser River, which was named after him. And the problem with the Fraser River is that when you get to the lower mainland, which is the Vancouver, Langley, Surrey area, the Fraser River becomes basically unnavigable. There's passages in that area that just make it impossible to be able to go through with any sort of water transportation. So he found the Fraser River. It was unnavigable. But the Fraser River is a really important river. It's the main river in British Columbia. Basically goes right through the heart of British Columbia and into the Pacific Ocean. David Thompson, another explorer, he did find the Columbia watershed, followed it all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and had high hopes that this was going to be fruitful, and he was going to be able to set up a fort. But he found out when he got there that the head of the Columbia River was already, somebody had already found it, and it was reached previously by American Fur Company, started by America's first millionaire, John Jacob Astor. So, just a couple of pictures here. This is why the Fraser River is unnavigable. You get to a place called Hell's Gate, and just massive rapids and rocks, and your chances of getting through this part of the Fraser River basically zero. So it was unusable as a fur trading route. This is a place called Astoria, and this is at the head of the Columbia River, and this is where the American Fur Trading Company had already set up a fort, which was too bad for David Thompson, because the Columbia River was a nice navigable river and one that could be used to some degree for the fur trade. Okay, and as you can see, the Columbia River kind of comes this way, and it ends up draining into the Pacific Ocean here. Okay, so this is kind of the Columbia River watershed, and this is what David Thompson was looking for. This is the Mackenzie River, and you can see pretty straight and pretty direct route, but goes to the wrong ocean as far as Alex Mackenzie was concerned. And this is the Fraser River watershed. So you can see it starts way up in central British Columbia, all the way down the middle of the province, and winds its way to emptying into the Pacific Ocean in the lower mainland of British Columbia. Okay, so that was what was happening on the continent. So remember, in Europe we had the Napoleonic Wars going on, and in North America we had this westward expansion that was taking place. Now, the War of 1812. So because Great Britain was involved so heavily in the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the United States, and remember we have a new country, the United States now, they saw this as an opportunity to take control of British North America. And for a few reasons, I guess, the United States really didn't understand why these British North American colonies continued to exist separate from themselves. They just saw it as a logical thing for these colonies to do would be to just join the United States. Why would they want to subject themselves to Great Britain when they could be free? And that's kind of the way the United States looked at it. So the odds are heavily in their favor when they decide to go on this campaign. Great Britain is not really defending British North America at all, because they're worried about the homeland in Europe. And so with the odds heavily in their favor, the United States saw the conquest of British North America as a matter of mere marching. They thought they would just march into British North America, and this is Upper and Lower Canada and the Maritimes, and they just felt that they would just join, that there would be actually probably even no fighting. They would just simply join, and the United States would take over. And this also brings up another concept called American Manifest Destiny. And there was this feeling then, and specifically even a couple of years later than this, that the entire North American continent would just become the United States. And that's this idea of American Manifest Destiny. And, I always talk about this as being maybe not over. Maybe that's still kind of a dream, or kind of maybe our destiny in a way, because so much of and you can see it now, so much of our economy, trading, and so on is so intertwined that I wouldn't say that American Manifest Destiny is as antiquated a term as what we might think about it, or think of it as being. There's people that would say that there's British Columbia, for instance, has more in common and more to do with Washington State, and Saskatchewan and Alberta have more in common with Montana and North Dakota, and Manitoba with Minnesota, and Ontario with New York State, and so on. And our maritime provinces are more like Maine and Vermont and Connecticut and those American states. So there's always this idea and this theory that we're more of a north-south country than we are an east-west country, and we're really just trying to force an east-west country. So anyway, it's a little bit of an aside there, but that's the idea of American Manifest Destiny. And that certainly existed in the War of 1812, or at the start of the War of 1812. Okay, so I just had some videos posted here. You can watch those. So what happened? So the Americans, unfortunately for them, and fortunately for us, if you want to look at it that way, they were poorly organized for the war. So because they just thought it would be so easy, they didn't really think it through that well. On the other hand, Canada did have some leaders that were excellent. So Isaac Brock and the native leader Tecumseh. So as a result of their leadership and their ability to organize the militia and First Nations groups in the area and so on, the United States was not able to take Canada. So they were spared conquest. There were a few American victories. They captured York or Toronto, Fort Erie, New Orleans, Plattsburgh, and there were also some British victories. And I call them British victories, not Canadian, because there is no official Canada yet. Even though we like to say we won the War of 1812, there was no we at this time. It was British North America. Queenston Heights, Chrysler Farm, Lower Canada, and Washington. And yes, that's the actual capital of the United States, Washington. Those were British victories. So basically what happened, to really simplify it, the Americans made a push to invade British North America. They were actually quite easily pushed back. And then when the Napoleonic Wars started to wrap up a little bit, some reinforcements came, the British kind of gained some confidence, and they made a push into American territory to maybe take back what they had lost in the American War of Independence, but then they were kind of pushed back as well. So as a result, nothing really changed. And so the Treaty of Ghent in 1814 signifies the end of the War of 1812, and you can see that number 2 here, all territory was returned to pre-1812 borders. So nothing happened. No land changed place or changed hands at all. So really, nobody won, if you want to look at it that way. Your textbook will describe, though, that some people did lose. And the First Nations people, they kind of lost because they were shut out of any negotiations. They took an active role in helping to protect British North America, but they were shut out of negotiations, and basically that was kind of the end for their dream, maybe, of holding on to the Ohio Valley. Remember, there's been a number of rebellions now, or a number of uprisings in that area. You had the Pontiac Uprising. You had First Nations people fighting against the United States in the American War of Independence, now fighting with British North America in the War of 1812, all in the hopes of maybe establishing their territory again in the Ohio Valley, but now they have basically been removed. So if you want to talk about a group or a nation or nations that actually suffered or lost the War of 1812, First Nations people probably are it. We have 1817. We have the Rush-Bagot Agreement. I mentioned that. It didn't end the War of 1812, but it forbid naval armaments on the Great Lakes. Before that, you had battleships and you had warships that actually patrolled the Great Lakes, and the 1817 Rush-Bagot Agreement forbid those naval armaments on the Great Lakes. All right, next we're going to talk about what's happening, and we're going to focus more. So the War of 1812 is done, and nothing really changed. We still have British North America. Those leftover colonies from the American War of Independence, they're still there, and they're going to work towards independence, and that's going to become Canada. But there's this push west now, too. There's some settlement, and there's some European movement into the Northwest, and we're going to talk about today the Selkirk settlement. So if you look at Canada, basically the center of the continent, really, kind of, Winnipeg in this area. And the Selkirk settlement that we're going to talk about was kind of just right in this area as well. Now, geographically, if you follow kind of this area right here, this is kind of Canadian Shield area. Lakes, rocks, minerals, trees, and so on. The Great Plains kind of exist in this area right here. Okay, so Winnipeg is sort of at a crossroads, or the Selkirk settlement. It's kind of where the east meets the northwest. Right, so strategically, it's pretty significant in terms of Canadian territory, anyways. Because really, if you go north, it's kind of Canadian Shield territory. If you go west, it's the prairies. So we think of, and we'll call Manitoba one of the prairie provinces, but really, there's just a little tiny piece of Manitoba that's actually in the prairies. The rest of Manitoba is beautiful lakes. Not that the prairies aren't beautiful, but beautiful lakes, trees, and so on. Much like northern Saskatchewan is. So Saskatchewan has the same kind of geography, but you have to go much further north to be able to find it. And Alberta's actually more plains, and you just kind of have the last northeastern tip of Alberta that's more Canadian Shield, and so on. Anyways, Winnipeg, Selkirk settlement, where the east meets the northwest. Kind of like how Texas in the United States is where the south meets the west. This is where the east meets the northwest. So right after the War of 1812, we have what's known as the Pemmican Wars, and I know I posted a video on YouTube a long time about this, and it went a couple of years with a few people watching and so on, and then one guy actually just really went off on me for inaccuracies and so on, but whatever, I'm just kind of going by our guy Will Ferguson and what he said in his textbook here, and just taking notes from that. So in the Northwest, the Métis Nation became established on the fur trading routes. So one of those areas, if you go back to that map, one of the key areas for travelers going into the Northwest was that Winnipeg-Selkirk area. And the Métis, their economy actually ended up depending upon the buffalo, and they would sell pemmican to the fur traders. Now, pemmican is this unique food. It's basically dried meat that's pounded into a fine, almost like powder, and then it's mixed with fat and berries. And because the oxygen has been taken out of it, it can be stored for years at a time, and it's highly nutritious. You can take it on the trail with you, and it's not something that has to be cooked because it's already been pre-cooked, and so on. So it's the fur traders ended up depending on pemmican a lot for these long fur trading voyages, and the Métis in turn ended up depending on it to a certain degree to be able to sell this to the fur traders as well. So by 1811, the Hudson Bay Company, they actually tried to, and I don't know if this was by design or not, but they tried to establish a colony, and that would be the Selkirk settlement in southern Manitoba, right around that Winnipeg area. So the Hudson Bay Company, they're trying to establish the Selkirk settlement. The Selkirk settlement was trying to basically establish farms, and we know what happens with the fur trade when farms appear. Fur-bearing animals don't last as long when you start breaking up the land and when you start farming it and when you start settling it. Now, for the Métis, this was concerning because this was right where the fur traders would come through. This is sort of where their headquarters, if you want to call it, where their territory was, where they had been established. And so this Selkirk settlement that the Hudson Bay Company was trying to set up would have been something that was not advantageous to the Métis. And as I said, was the Hudson Bay Company really trying to establish it for an agricultural farming community? Or were they actually trying to disrupt the Métis pemmican trade and in turn really hurt the Northwest Company, who were their bitter rivals? I think it was probably a bit of both. So anyways, because this settlement was right in the Métis, right in their area, tension started to grow. And basically what had happened, there's a clash in 1816, and basically it was the Métis had gone to the Hudson Bay Company to try to explain their position, and things went south, and they had a bit of a battle. Not a bit, they had a battle. Now, when I grew up, they used to call it the Seven Oaks Massacre, but now it's kind of called a battle because as we got both sides of it, we realized that this was just something that unfortunately got out of control. And the Métis, their leader at that time was Cuthbert Grant. 21 Selkirk settlers ended up dying in this battle. And I have a little video here as well. It's actually really old. I found it on YouTube. I remember watching this on film strips when I was in elementary school, but unfortunately it's the only video I can find of the Seven Oaks. Actually, it's not unfortunate. It's kind of cool to see an old video like this as well. And I think that's it. So I will explain this more if you happen to catch me live. If not, this is a pretty good explanation. I'm going to put this on YouTube as well, and we'll see if I get some nasty comments from some university people that have studied this a lot more in depth than what I have. So that's it.